Oh, the red light goes out. Can you hear me? Not yet. It says it's on, but there's no light. Are we low on batteries? Maybe.
And I'm gonna leave this up.
Okay, we got a good red light. Okay, you can hear me okay? All right, so our next presenter is going to be Penelope. Her title is Code Hedgehogs, Changing the S in SLDC to Secure, as opposed to software development lifecycle or systems development lifecycle. And so basically, she's going to talk about secure software development using a shift left effort and aiming to identify security vulnerabilities early in the development lifecycle. So takeaways from this talk will be ideas on how to engage developers in shifting the security posture of the organization through secure coding with a simple analogy, concrete steps at each phase of the SDLC, and fun ways to learn how to do it. Quick review on how to integrate secure coding at each step of the software development lifecycle, and then discuss top application vulnerabilities and mitigation techniques to defend against known attacks. And then there's 3 different approaches to threat modeling, and wrapping up with recommendations on how to try your hand on the other side of gamified red team challenges where coding skills give you a decided advantage. Penelope is an experienced cybersecurity professional and a learner and passionate about all things cyber. She has 2 bachelor's degrees. I was going to ask you, what were they previously in?
So the first one's called Political Economy of Industrial Societies.
Okay.
PEIS, and then the other was I was a K-12 bilingual educator.
And now a master's as well as a master's, and now a degree in cybersecurity and information assurance.
Correct.
Very good. So she is active in the Black Hills information security community. Speaking of, are you going to?
Planning to go to Deadwood.
Deadwood. Yep. Okay. So there you go. She's going to give a presentation or just attending? Volunteering there. So active with Black Hills information security community. And appointed Friends of BHIS designation, normally known as the Nerd Herders.
Yeah.
Not familiar with that one. So, all right. You might even stumble upon cameo appearances on the newscasts of backdoors and breaches demos found on YouTube or Twitch. She's an educator at heart, excited to share her expertise and audiences whenever given the opportunity. Penelope also has her CompTIA Security Plus and CYSA Plus certs, and an adjunct instructor at Northern Kentucky University.
In their Gen Cyber program. Yeah.
In their Gen Cyber program. So, welcome, and the floor is yours. I'm not putting any pressure on you, but when you're done, we have lunch.
Right. So hopefully I can keep you entertained long enough to... Okay. Well, I was expecting 30 minutes, so let's see how this goes. So you may have noticed he did not say my last name because it is Rozhkova, and when people see it, they are just like, I don't know what to do with that. Exactly. And so I married Russian, and I've learned a little bit about the Russian culture. And in Russian, the word anecdote kind of means what it means in English, but it is more like what we use for to tell a joke. And so that's actually what I want to start with today and give you some insight into why I said code hedgehogs. And so this, let's see, go here. See it. Because the light is, let's see. At the laptop. Okay.
Well, we need that box.
In 5 minutes.
Yep, I know. We tested it before I started to talk.
It's not just me.
No, it's not. All right. So let's see. Yeah. So the pointer's working.
There it goes.
So I'll go backwards. Oh, there it is. Okay, there's the word. All right. So apparently. All right. So my Russian anecdote. So there's this group of mice who are chatting among themselves, and they say to them, they're talking about like how they have this terrible position in life. They are at the bottom of the food chain. They don't like being there anymore. What can we do about this problem that we have about being at the bottom of the food chain? And they're just like, oh, we can't figure it out, but I bet you that wise owl can give us an idea. So the mice head over to the owl, and they ask the owl, and they explain their situation about how they don't like being at the bottom of the food chain, and what can we do to make ourselves less vulnerable. And the owl says, oh, that's a good question. Let me think about that for a minute. And the owl says, I've got it. You can become a hedgehog. And the mice are like, oh, that's a great idea, isn't it? We have quills. If we're hedgehogs, and we can roll up in that ball, and we're not going to be as easily to be grabbed by those mouths because our quills will like protect us. That's a great idea. Let's become hedgehogs. And so they walk off, and they're so excited, and they're just like, oh my gosh, I want to be a hedgehog. Let's do it. Let's do it. And they stop. They're like, wait a minute. He didn't tell us how. How are we supposed to be hedgehogs? And so they're like, okay, well, let's go back and ask him. And they go back to the owl, and he's just like, yeah, of course I didn't tell you how to be hedgehogs, Like, I'm the idea guy. You go figure out how to be a hedgehog. So, the owl gave them a great idea, but then they didn't know what to do with it. So that's kind of where we are with programmers today, right? Programmers kind of can be the mice in the cybersecurity vulnerability space, right? They are who they are, and sometimes don't see the reason to have quills. So, please. Yes, okay. So, this talk, hopefully, as Carl said in the introduction, will give you some ideas about how to shift your security posture and give you some talking points for when you're dealing with developers who kind of say, well, we don't need to be hedgehogs. So when we have the secure development lifecycle, whether it's waterfall or agile, generally speaking, the security starts at the testing level, right? So they have not been thinking with the secure posture in mind as they get started. And when we get to testing and doing quality assurance, that's when it starts to happen. And so we get the dynamic analysis with the tools that are in place, and hopefully the tools work. And you might have some pen testers come in and test it at that point. But the new idea in this area is to shift left. And one of the people I'm going to talk about later says push left, right? Because it depends on the environment of whether they're willingly going to go to the left or if they're going to have to be encouraged to move. But we can start at the beginning, and we can look at our documentation that we have in place that is probably in your risk and governance, and figure out how to start this project with the planning to begin with. And you can go all the way through the life cycle by adding in relevant steps along the whole process that encourage a secure posture. And so that by the time you get to that testing, that quality assurance level, you've already been thinking about it. And the thing is, when you start early, then it's more cost effective, both in terms of time and money. And then you can move on and make sure that it doesn't just stop at testing, but it is also included in the other steps where you're going to have, when you're in deployment and you have the final security review, you can create that incident response plan, and hopefully based on what you've been doing through the previous steps, have it built in there. And then the maintenance part, of course, as well, to have your developers in mind of like, oh, these are kind of the things that are out there. And if the new ones come up, it's not going to be news to them about how this process is working. So along the whole way, you want to keep in your mind like the threat modeling process and adjusting your priorities and risk reduction strategies as you move along. So it can be a much more dynamic process. So where do we start, right? So if a developer's like never really had this education, when I gave this talk to like a group of students who came up through Tech Elevator, and they said, oh, we only got 1 day on security. And so, you know, it's a 14-week program, it goes fast, they don't necessarily know what that means to code securely. So, start with something that's out there, well-established. And if you look at these top 10, like 9 of them are things that developers could help with, right? Like the insufficient logging and monitoring is like the only one that is not kind of in the programmer's wheelhouse. And you can introduce them to the website. You know, you can take them there and, you know, pick something to show them off your list and take them through the page. So, and if you're in a dynamic situation, I was not going to challenge the demo gods and try and do anything live. But it breaks it down. So it gives you across the top the threat agents and attack vectors for broken authentication. It gives you the security weaknesses and the impacts of having broken authentication if it's not something that's in the forefront of their minds. Then it breaks it down in the next 4 blocks, right? So for all of these vulnerabilities, there's a page like this at OWASP. You all may already know that, but programmers probably don't. And you hear a lot of things from programmers. Well, I use an obscure code. I don't need to worry about that. You know, it's third party. It doesn't really touch anything important. I don't need to worry about that. So if you focus on what you think is likely to happen, you're probably going to get cause problems for your security team. But if you instead focus on what can happen and be prepared, and if you start with that process, as I said from the beginning, with that in mind, like we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know who's out there who wants to attack us, then we need to think about what can happen and not what's likely to happen. So the most common vulnerabilities exploited during pen testing are here. So I got into cybersecurity because I was coaching my son's Cyber Patriot team. Oh, did I? Okay. So so Cyber Patriot, Blue Team. I love Blue Team. I like being on that side of it. And when we first started the team, my first event was B-Side Cincinnati in 2018, and I played the CTF there, and I just fell in love with cybersecurity. And so that's how I moved from education into cyber, because my new choice, my son decided, I was a homeschooler, and my son decided to go back to brick and mortar. I was just like, what am I going to be when I grow up? Now I get to choose. And this was like the automatic thing for me, because I just love it all. And I love the gamification. And so I am not a coder. One of the first things that I learned in my program was that coding can be really important in cybersecurity, right? Like high school, so I'm kind of the same age as Phil and Dr. C here. We had TRS-80s in my high school lab. I learned to code BASIC, a little bit of Fortran, COBOL, and Pascal, which I don't think any of that is used today. And it was so long ago, it's not like I remember how to code. But, you know, I've had some fun with Python now, and I took a little Java. So I can play with code. I can use it when I'm playing my games enough to like figure out how to break it. And so that's me, right? I am, if you do not have input validation in your code, I can figure that part out, right? So that's like the easy one, I think, to kind of start teaching your programmers that that's important, right? Let's see if this works here. Can we push play on that? I don't know if I can do that from here.
The square. You guess which spot that goes?
The square.
That's right. The square.
Yes.
And how about this rectangle? That one
Also the square.
goes in there too.
Yeah.
It was working.
Up next, you've got this thin rectangle. Guess
Rectangle.
where that goes?
A thin
That's
rectangle.
right. It goes in the square hole. The cylinder.
The circle.
I think that goes in
The circle.
the square hole. Do you see a slot that would fit
The semicircle.
semicircle?
The semicircle.
That's right. It's the square hole. Triangle. You know what hole that goes
The
in,
triangle.
right?
Triangle.
That's right. Square. We have the arch.
Arch. Arch.
You guessed it.
Orange.
It goes in the square hole.
I know how to do that. I don't know how to code, but I could like figure out what to put into those forms when I'm on a web app and like figure out how to break in. I'm still at the point where I don't necessarily know what to do on the other side, but I can like get some access, right? So I think this is like a great thing to show your coders, right? Like, what are the people on the outside going to do when you put a form out on your web app and you didn't do input validation because you're like, oh, they know how to read directions. It says to put this in, right? Right. Well, maybe the regular user is going to put things where you want to, but your pen tester's not going to do that. Your script kiddies aren't going to do that. And it's not secure, right? And if it's someone more malicious than that, you definitely don't want them going in that way. So again, so preventing the SQL injections, there's like a bunch of stuff here that there are probably people in this room who know exactly how to do all those things. But I know that the one thing that can stop me as a new person is validate every user input. And I think that's a great place to start. And I think this is like a place where you can show programmers that it's important to improve your security posture. You can also introduce them to MITRE. So my college program didn't teach me about MITRE. I did it as a special project in my program, right? But if even cybersecurity professionals in a good program, you know, I was in a Anyway, the NSA approved education program, right? MITRE never came up in a single one of my classes, and I kept coming to these events, right? And I would hear about it, and I was just like, so I want to thank you out here who have been doing it for teaching me what I wasn't learning at school, and I learned about MITRE by coming to these talks, right? So if I'm not learning it in a cybersecurity program that's approved by the NSA, your programmers probably aren't. So you could introduce it to them, and you can say, look, these are things that can happen, you know, introduced during the design phase, or these are the things that are introduced during implementation. Or if they're taught a specific code, and you can send them and say, like, these are the vulnerabilities that might be there if you're using C or Java or PHP, right? There's a lot of PHP out there. And so you have a way to introduce them to things that they might not have been thinking about. In my experience, when I've talked to like those tech elevator people, it's not that they're not interested, it's just like, oh, we didn't know. So let's know. And if we know, we can get them on the path to being able to code hedgehogs instead of mice, right? Because if we have mice, it's going to be really hard to turn those web apps that you've created, ignoring the first 4 steps, ignoring what vulnerabilities are out there, and then expect them to make hedgehogs at the end. So you can introduce them to the idea of threat modeling. My favorite explanation of like the vulnerability versus threat explanation, because you know I had lots of that for sure in my classes, right? But a very simple way to help keep it clear in your head for me is The threat is from the outside. The threat is the thing that is outside of the system, and the vulnerability is the weakness within. And then risk is the intersection of the two. So I think when people can look at it from that way without all of the long explanations of, oh, this is a threat, blah, blah, blah. I can't even remember what those classroom ones were, but I know it was a lot of words. But that has really helped me. When I first heard that explanation, it's just like, oh, it's suddenly clear. So let's make it as simple as possible for them to kind of understand what are the things we're looking at. So then we know what hopefully we have some ideas from the things that we just discussed, what some of the vulnerabilities, the internal things are that could be weaknesses of what we are coding. And then let's give them some insight into what the threat model, what the threats could be. So it could be attacker-centric, right? Do you work somewhere where industrial espionage can be a problem? Do you work somewhere that you're somewhere in the supply line that it could be like, classic espionage, that they might want to use your third party to access something that's a little more classified or up the international food chain? Software centric, again, so we talked about like what are the platforms, what are the components of the application that you're building, and have a sense of like what are the weaknesses in your components. And then asset centric, do you have PII in there that people want to get access to? Do you have state secrets that, somewhere down the food chain, like that you could get access to? And so giving them a sense of like, these are the thoughts that are going through the attacker's minds and what comes up to the surface for what you are creating. So it gives them the background to understand that, how do I identify the known vulnerabilities, the threats? How do I understand these risks? And then they can go on and like start deciding like what security controls besides input validation, right? Which should just be automatic, that they should put into place. How do you prioritize those risks within your organization, right? That's not just, the conversations, kind of like what Micah was talking about. I don't know if Dr. C knew what I was going to really be talking about, because I just sent him my slides, but I love serendipity, right? It's just like, oh my gosh, like my talk, I think it's going to make so much more sense coming after Micah. I could not have planned this better. Thank you so much. And he was blessed, right? He had somebody in his organization who was a security person who had that web app background. One of my compatriots who is a strong technical cybersecurity person took a job recently, and he's been there a month, and he's like not like loving it, and he's just like, couldn't you have done this talk a month ago? Because if you would have been talking about the fact that to be a really great web app security person, you should probably have had some development experience first, before you try to be that person. And he's a great technical cybersecurity person, but he's not a developer, and he's struggling. So, building up our developers, I think, for our need in cybersecurity to get those people already coming in with a secure posture mindset will give us a pipeline to bring in better cybersecurity people for the app side. So, and if you have those people who already understand the development side and we train them in the cybersecurity side, the prioritizing risk and creating a risk reduction strategy are going to be a lot, well, they're not going to be easy ever, right? But hopefully a little smoother. So the considerations we want to take into effect are, the technologies leveraged by the application, the client-side databases that people might want to be trying to gain access to, REST, the native programming languages of the app, and the integrations. Again, what third parties are going to be attaching to us. And then we want to look at the risks that are non-technical, the loss in terms of time, if you have to rewrite it to make it secure, the loss of, from a branding standpoint or a reputation standpoint, if something goes wrong. We have the theft that we talked about, which could be the monetary or it could be the information, whether it's secrets or personal, the PII. And then again, the delays, right? It's going to be a lot easier to move through the development process and build it in than it is if you have to go back and try and turn your mouse into a hedgehog. So I think, you know, from a business standpoint, it makes sense to train these people early on to have security built in. So then again, the hows, right? How do I build secure coding skills? So let's say that they come out of Tech Elevator and then what, right? Because they got there one day in class. And even if you're in a four-year university, if you're going down a certain track, there's not necessarily going to be cybersecurity built into your program. So they're a great talk. So again, I love serendipity. When I was writing this talk originally, I did it for the Women Who Code. This popped into my feed, right? This DevSecCon 24 hours around the world. They broke it up into the 3 segments of North America, Europe, and then like the Japan, Australia timeframe. And so around the clock, you had experts from around the world available to you. And it was great. And this was my favorite one here, right? Because again, I like the gamification. So I recommend to everybody go spend your 20 minutes with Rosemary Wang and play I Spy, an insecure delivery pipeline. And it doesn't have to be dry, right? It can be fun. So if you want something a little more dry, you can go to Bright Talk also and do those searches there, and you're going to find, you know, like the salespeople who are trying to sell their products. They'll also have it, and you can learn from them too, right? You don't have to buy products to learn how to utilize the methodologies. So it's easy to find talks. You can find blogs. So this is Tanya Janka, and I don't know if I'm saying her name right. And I joke that, you know, I don't recommend her just because she has the same color hair that I do, but she's awesome. And if you can, I'm not sure if you can read it here, but, you know, so she starts here like this bottom one is pushing left. So she's the one who says, you know, and she works in the environment, so she probably knows better than I that you have to push left. And it starts with part 1, and she has like 5 parts, I think, of just the pushing left part. She has up here URL parameters. Whatever it is that you're looking for. It has safe dependencies. So she has, right here we have 12. She has 2 pages of blog posts, and she is from We Hack Purple. And she created that organization. And so right here at just one website, you can get 24 mini tutorials on how to become a better, more secure coder. And then there's my favorite part, right? The games. So again, at the same time that I was like writing this is my first experience with this company. And so I was attending virtually the Way West conference, and they had a CTF there for coding. And I played it a little bit. And again, like I think if I'd been a developer or coder, I would have done much better in it. But I loved it, right? So, and when I went in there, what they do is they give you these blocks of code, and they mark a few of them. They say, which piece is the one that is insecure? And so you pick that one. I actually got a couple right. And then it gives you the opportunity to fix the code, right? So then it gives you the option to go in and fix the code. So it can be fun, right? Like it's challenging. You get immediate feedback that, oh, yes, I was able to spot what needed to be fixed. I bet you can't guess which piece I found. Input validation. And so there are fun things out there to do in order to learn. Command and control. So my very first one, in my account, I was only able to get 75 points in my first event with a command and control range. And honestly, it could have just been that I learned how to follow the rules. I don't even know at this point what my 75 points were for. But, and it was, I do remember that it was their social networking app. And so over time, so we can learn, even I can learn, not being a developer, how to improve. So this is my most recent score, right? I think it probably goes to 12,000 or something, but I'm really proud of my 3770 compared to my 75, that I can learn how to break the web apps, right? So again, I'm not the developer, but I can learn more easily how to break the web applications. So if you're a developer, if you wanted to go to the red team side, you're probably going to be way awesome because you're going to know what other things you can be compromising that I don't know because I'm not on that side of it. And it's also, if you're going to stay on the development side or do the blue team side, then you know what people are using to get into you. And so BHIS actually buys the command and control when they retire. And that one's not free, right? So for $30 a month, you can play inside of their cyber range. But not only do they have the old web apps that you can play with, but they actually have lessons built into it. So it teaches you what you're looking at that web app. It teaches you how to compromise it. And so you can build it in a supported environment. So you already heard I have a huge bias towards Black Hills because I've learned so much from them. And so this is I think a great opportunity. And you can go on the website. You don't have to pay the $30 to see what it's like, right? You can go in there and poke around a bit and see oh, is it worth my time? Or would it be worth time for the people in my environment to spend some time here? So I think if you use some of the tools that I'm suggesting here, maybe you can be even better than a hedgehog, right? Maybe you can code a porcupine instead. So again, that same week when I was building this job came through, right? And I was just like, I can't apply for this job, right? But a developer who's been through that other training, they could probably apply for a job like this, right? If you code securely and you have that mentality of a secure position, then when these jobs come up out there that we have a huge need for, we can kind of piggyback on that coder pipeline, right? And have our pipeline filled so that these jobs can be filled. So I'm open for any questions.
Okay, so questions. Anybody have any questions?
You were talking, when you're talking about scenarios, are you focusing on all case scenarios or just worst case scenarios?
When I'm for the developers,
Yeah.
I think that they should focus on all scenarios, right? And then there's always time and money, and there's the balance, right? Because that's where you get the pushback, right? But I think that and I didn't mention back when I was going through the slides, but I think that if you can have a system where the posture and the mentality is already, I want to secure code securely, then you're going to be able to broaden that a little more easily, right? Because it's going to be already within their bandwidth, right? So if some of the input validation is just automatic and they're doing that, then that gives you room to add something more, right? And it's also going to save time, again, when the person who's doing it's a big enough company and you have that specialized person who's going through and saying, you missed this, right? And not having to have it be sent back. So I think if you have that mentality, it's easier to do more than if you're starting from zero.
Any other questions? We got any online?
No, we do not.
No, not yet? Okay. So I have some stories that obviously through my many years of cyber experience, coding, hacking, pen testing, all that good stuff. I've been doing this for over 30 years. So one of the stories when you talk about secure, oh, by the way, I love that video. That was great. All those different things. members through some of the stuff that I've been dealing with in the past is that, a great example is the zip code field, right?
Yep.
So you ask them, okay, put in the zip code. So they design it, right? They don't do any of the input testing or validation or any of that kind of stuff. And so you put in 45431, the area code here in the area. But then you're like, hey, well, what about letters and numbers, right? So when they're developing this stuff, they should be only allowed to enter digits and not alphabet letters,
Right.
or the
Oh,
letters.
yep, letters, yeah.
And so, those are ways to test it. So I know Daryl's got some great stories that he's told through the years with putting in %X and some other things in the input fields. And, the other one is Bobby drop tables is another great example.
Yep, I know how to do that one.
Question in the back. Go ahead.
One section of the U.S. Army, you have there.
And where?
You didn't miss that with Maine.
Really? Never heard of that before. So,
they get into that.
yes.
Are you going to exclude Canadian customers?
No, I'm just talking U.S., right? Yeah, no. I'm talking U.S., right? So when you're filling out and you get, because it's a U.S. address, that's where the
Right.
zip codes are usually, that's the, now expanding out into the international, well, that's a different requirement. But again, right, based on that input, or even phone numbers, right? How many times you fill out a form and you type in, extra characters in there. They're getting better about it because now it rejects it. It says digits only. You can't even put in the parentheses for the area code and the little hyphen for between that. So they're getting better. They're getting smarter. The words are getting out that, this development should be, doing the secure coding earlier in that development process.
Well, that's right, like what you're saying, if there's a check, right? So like, if it says Maine as the state, then it will probably, the coder can write it so that it skips that validation and maybe jumps to a different validation. And the same for the international. Like, there are ways that the coder, that's the
Yeah.
point, right? The coder should be able to
Well-
think about what is that person going to try and stick in there, and how do we keep them locked into getting just what we want to get from it.
Yeah, back in my early coding days, right, it was, let me get it done to be able to turn in or do the job, right? I'll go back later and fix it, right? Sure, right? You've all heard that. We'll go back and fix that later when it goes to production. And what ends up happening, that test stuff turns into production, and it's never validated. So, that's why we've got to, provide this education and start doing the earlier processes of testing and developing earlier in the life cycle for this stuff. So, because, most typical programmers, they just want to get it working because then they're moving on to the next thing. They're lazy, and they just want to get it to function. And it's like, why would anybody enter something in anyways? Because it says to put in a zip code. Why would you put anything different in there, right? Because that's the way most engineers, programmers, people think, is they want to get it done. Mike, you have a comment?
I'd like to offer a friendly challenge.
Sure.
Are they lazy, or are they being incentivized by the organization for a different metric than what you care about? Maybe
True.
they're incentivized by delivery of features and not going through breaking the critical delivery dates.
True,
And I
that
think-
is
yeah.
a good point, right? That could be that as well. And when you say other incentives, right? When they based on features, right? Microsoft Excel. Anybody remember a few years back when they got paid by the line of code and nobody actually checked, and it actually had Flight Simulator embedded because they got so many extra lines of code. And you had the right Easter egg, you were actually able to launch Flight Simulator out of Excel if you had the right keystrokes, right? Because nobody checked or validated based on the number of codes. Was that on purpose? Well, sure it was, because nobody was checking, but that's an input validation.
And let's do some libraries within your organization, right? Because I think Micah makes a very valid point, especially when you're looking at some of the agile, and you have your 2-week sprint and you have to get certain things done in that amount of time. And is that my priority? So building that secure posture as part of your culture is crucial, right? and then maybe incentivizing kind of like what you're saying, like, oh, I built this piece of input validation that we can add to our library that, you don't have to like necessarily start from scratch. And so within your organization, having some templates in place that people can use for things that are done often.
Yep. So, any other questions, comments? So I did want to ask, you were saying you're working with Northern Kentucky University as part of the NSA
Gen Cyber program.
Gen Cyber program. So is that a center of excellence through NSA?
Well,
any kind of part
so-
of that program?
Right, so thank you for giving me that back. So yes, it is a center of excellence.
Okay.
And so their program is a center of excellence, but they've also have like an additional project. There are only 10 in the country. They only award 10
Right.
places the opportunity to teach a Gen Cyber class. And so Dr. Anker, and he lets you just say Dr. Anker because his last name's harder to say than mine. So it is a long last name that starts with a CH. Chatapati, maybe. He was able to win one of the contracts to do the Gen Cyber, and he spent 2 weeks teaching high school teachers cybersecurity so that they can get it into their classrooms and hopefully get that idea of like, oh, this might be a fun thing or to do when I grow up for the high school students. And it was a whole range. You did not have to be a computer science teacher. We had some generalists. Starting down like from the 5th grade, and we had like a chemistry teacher and a history teacher. And so we talked to them about like, well, how can you talk about cybersecurity in the classroom depending on what your area is? So, I think that the cryptography is easy to do in history, right? You can talk about it during World War II. You can give them, or you can talk about Caesar cipher, exactly. You can talk about it even in the ancient history. So
Yep. So I was going to add to that, right? So I was very fortunate through my career. I was actually given a scholarship through NSA back then it was called Information Assurance Scholarship Program, and so they sent me to school to get my PhD, and that was paid for by NSA.
that's awesome.
Right. So that's how I got my PhD, but. They've kind of changed the name. It's still available right now through other various institutions, and they're now farmed it out to the universities where they have the center of excellence. And so that scholarship is still available for and they've actually moved it down. It used to be master's PhD, but now they also do it for bachelors, and they're trying to get it pushed down to the high school levels as well. So, but it's now the cybersecurity scholarship program. But if you go out to NSA's website, they have all the educational institutions that are associated with centers of excellence that are funded by NSA to teach cybersecurity and get enrolled in those programs. So if you know folks that are trying to get educated, looking for extra help or assistance, a lot of times what they do is if you accept that scholarship, you'll have a job on the other end working for a government entity where they help place you to actually then pay back some of that scholarship money. But you're doing work in cybersecurity, right? You get your degree, they pay for it, and then you go, and then they give you a job. I'm like, I mean, how often do you get to do that kind of stuff? So
That's awesome.
It's really a great program. So I am a beneficiary of that, and so one of the things that I try to do is actually also promote that, because one of the clauses, so to speak, was to help advertise or promote, right, the NSA scholarship programs. So there are a lot of institutions. It's grown quite a bit over the last few years with NSA, and I didn't realize Northern Kentucky was one of them. So
Yeah, and the Cyber Academy at Muscatatuck is where I went, and it's
oh
a
yeah, I've been
2-year.
out to Muscatatuck. Yeah, that's nice. The cyber range out there.
Yep.
I was there before it became that, but then they were making that transition. So that's pretty neat, where you get to go test some IoT stuff. So there's a
Smart
nice
house.
IoT range out there in Indiana. So that's pretty neat. So if you get a chance to do that. The other thing I was going to mention, so you were talking about, the NICE initiative. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. National Initiative of Cybersecurity Education. Right, that's sponsored by NIST. Right, so they put out all this academia stuff. They work with the various educational institutions, right, and try and help form relationships between the universities and the businesses and stuff like that to help promote cybersecurity education. So that's another avenue. If you go to NIST, look at NICE, National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, along with NSA. So that's another avenue to look for like scholarships for people trying to get, bachelor's, master's, PhDs in cybersecurity, and then also they help partner with them placement afterwards for education. So it's here in Dayton, we got Wright State and UD, and they also have cybers. I was adjunct over at Wright State. They have a 4+1 program where you go in your senior year, start taking classes for your master's. You do the 4+1, and then you come out with a master's in cybersecurity. So they have a pretty good program. So you only have 5 years versus 6 for a master's in cybersecurity. So your undergrad will be computer science, computer engineering, something of that nature, and then your master's would be focused on cybersecurity. UD does more of the information management type, or the business side of the house. So that's kind of the relationship between UD and Wright State here in the Dayton area for academia. So, yes, go ahead, Matt.
Sinclair.
Oh yeah, and Sinclair, thank you. And Sinclair, they do a lot of early entry level stuff. They help with associates and doing certifications. They work with the various working employee. So a lot of their other classes are geared towards the working person. So they're either online or at night. So you can work towards getting either your certification or your associates, and then transfer to Ohio State, Wright State, UD, University of Cincinnati, Kentucky now. So a lot of educational opportunities. But this is stuff that is very critical, and hopefully as you continue to do this, because you started in education, right? Transitioned into the cyber field. Right, but these are different avenues that you can use to help with that whole education.
And there are more programs coming out that are targeted at them. Like NKU has just recently added, I don't think it goes live until October. You can start your certification process there, and then you can work towards your master's once it goes live in October.
Yep. So, all right, anybody? Yes, go ahead.
Is there an information assurance course? And I was thinking of Cedarville or someplace.
Yes, Cedarville is part of. They are one of the. They were. I did a NICE conference with NIST a few years ago in Cedarville. Yes, they did have some classes down there that were part of the. I think it was associated more with NICE, not necessarily NSA. So, but part of that NICE thing is they develop the curriculum and they share. So they'll say, Cedarville, we want you to write this particular class, but you have to share it with the other universities, right? And so what they do is they pick certain universities to write certain classes that they may be more focused on, or their area of expertise based on the professors that are there and stuff like that. And then they are asked then to share those modules to help other universities create a cyber program. So yes, thank you for that.
And I think that's the way the Gen Cyber is kind of set up that way as well. So like the curriculum that we wrote for that 2 weeks, we provide lesson plans to NSA so that they can put them out on their website. So
yeah, so that's
teachers
right.
have
It goes back
access
to
to it.
NSA, and then they farm it out to the appropriate universities and institutions and stuff like that. So,
And also, I saw where Sinclair offers a logistics for the base. It's like a background, you get logistics.
logistics one?
Yeah.
No, okay.
But are they even considering cyber? Because why would you purchase something that's not secure?
Right. So yeah, logistics is huge. I mean, we've seen that back in December. With supply chain, right? Yeah, oh, yeah. With supply chain, that's a huge issue, right? Because if you're purchasing stuff that is not secure, that can be a challenge too. And they're supposedly trusted, supply. So refresh me, SolarWinds, right?
Yep.
So the SolarWinds hack, they were how many locations did they get into? Because that was a trusted source supply, right, that we thought was all safe, and come to find out they were vulnerable all these years, or for quite a while. So all good stuff. Anything else? Any questions? All right, Penelope, thank you. Great job.
Thank you.